Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, bringing you another episode right here, right after the NFL draft for the Gators, the 2022 NFL draft, much different than the 2021 NFL draft. The Gators had only 3 selections: Kaiir Elam, Zachary Carter, Dameon Pierce in this year's draft, compared to the 8 that were drafted last year. As we go, and look, I just mentioned 3 picks for the Gators. The first 3 picks last year, 2 in the first round with Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney, 1 in the second round with Kyle Trask. So much different this year for the Gators. A lot of reasonings for that. Not as many guys coming out. Roster not as in good shape. We'll get into that later. We can peek ahead to next year. That list should be back up there for the Gators and potential draft picks for next year. So we'll get into that too. Before we sign off here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching live, thank you so much for joining in right here. Subscribe. You get that notification when Gators Breakdown goes live or there's a new episode out there. Check us out at the home of Gators Breakdown, news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. And coming up this week, try and do on Gators Breakdown Plus, a member chat. Because also this week on Gators Breakdown, Corey Bender from On3 Sports will hop on and we'll talk some recruiting this week. So we kind of get spring football in the review, NFL draft in the review. Time to turn the focus to recruiting right here on Gators Breakdown. All right, so let's start with it right here. Thursday night, NFL draft gets started, of course, and Kaiir Elam opened this year's draft for the Gators after being selected by the Buffalo Bills with a 23rd overall pick. And this was we were questioning a little bit now, would Kaiir Elam squeak into the first round? And he did. Of course, he was higher up on draft board before this last season started, dealt with some injuries, had a really good performance versus Alabama. That's the game he also got injured in late. That held him out some this past season, hurt his draft stock a little bit, but does get drafted in the first round. 23rd pick overall to the Buffalo Bills, a team that needs – look, they don't need help on offense right now. They need help on defense to keep up with the likes of Kansas City out there. And, look, they decided they needed help on defense, and their first pick is Kaiir Elam. Elam became the Gators' 54th first-round pick since the 1967 draft. That's the common era of that's what NFL considers the common draft era, which ranks him becoming the 54th first-round draft pick since 1967, which ranks second most among the SEC and 5th in the NCAA. We'll get into that. We'll get some more details later on with some news and notes for this Gators draft. But the pick also marked the 3rd straight year with a first-round pick out of Florida. Elam, Florida's 6th defensive back drafted in the first round since 2010, which is tied for second most in the SEC. Florida is only one of 2 schools in the nation to have had at least one first-round selection in 9 of the last 10 NFL drafts. For Elam, 3-year letter winner at Florida, 35 career games, 26 starts. He was coach's All-SEC first team and AP All-SEC selection, along with a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist in 2020. He totaled 79 tackles, 26 pass breakups, 6 interceptions. Member of the coach's all-freshman team in 2019. 3 pass breakups versus number 1 Alabama the past season, and only allowed 2 catches and 7 targets against the Tide. And look, Jameson Williams is on the field there for Alabama, and as soon as Elam was drafted, I kind of retweeted and put it out there. I was like, look, this is when he's healthy, when he's ready to go, this is the type of performance you can get from Kaiir Elam. Looks like that's what Buffalo fell in love with a bit as well. So Florida did share this too of what Desmond Howard had to say about the pick here. There's a lot to like about Kaiir Elam. 6'1", 191 pounds. He can flat out cover guys. Extremely athletic, has great ball skills, can run, likes to play press coverage, and gets his hands on you. He's good in zone coverage as well, watching the quarterback's eyes, trying to beat them to throws. This is a great pick for the Buffalo Bills team that really has a complete roster. this can be a piece that puts Buffalo over the top. Elam's going to be on the field a lot with that Buffalo offense and how much they score. So that defense, he'll get every opportunity to help them shut down other offenses so Buffalo can get past. Will Miles was happy about this pick there, of course, being a Buffalo fan. And we saw Katie Turner as well. She didn't really get a whole lot of time with Kaiir Elam, but going from Gators to Buffalo, I know she's put out there a lot that she's a big Buffalo Bills fan. So from the University of Florida to Buffalo goes Kaiir Elam. So then we kind of wondered who would be the next pick for the Gators. Would it be Dameon Pierce? Would it be Zachary Carter? And there it was. It was Zachary Carter to the Bengals, selected Friday in the 3rd round with the 95th overall pick. He became the 133rd defender and 51st defensive lineman drafted from Florida, which marked the 11th straight draft that a Gators defensive lineman was picked and tied for the 2nd longest active streak. Pick also tied Florida for the lead, 25 picks among defensive lines from SEC schools in the first 3 rounds from 1967. UF is 2nd all-time in the SEC with 51 defensive linemen drafted since the modern draft era. Across 46 career games for the Gators, Carter totaled 107 tackles, almost 30 tackles for loss, 17.5 sacks. The season opener this past season, 3 sacks, lost with a 23-yard of loss total, along with a forced fumble, to earn one of 2 career SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week awards. His 11 tackles for loss this past season ranked tied for 39th in college football, as he recorded 1 in every game. Senior Bowl, he recorded 1 in every game but 3 for those tackles for loss. Reese is Senior Bowl invitee, member of the 2021 SEC Community Service Team, ended his career with 21 quarterback hurries. So Carter goes off the board to Cincinnati, another team, of course. Look, these Gators are going to good teams, these first 2 picks. There with the Bengals, of course, playing in the Super Bowl, and then the Bills going along with Kaiir Elam. So then we wondered where Dameon Pierce go. We knew he was getting drafted. He was rising up draft boards, especially after a Senior Bowl performance where he was probably the best overall player there at the Senior Bowl. And he goes to the Houston Texans in the 4th round, 107th pick overall. Pierce became the 31st Florida running back to be drafted and the 135th offensive player from Florida since 1967. Also the 3rd Gators running back drafted in the past 4 years, joining LaMichael Pirine last year in the 2020 draft to the Jets and Jordan Scarlett in 2019 to the Carolina Panthers. Pirine was a 4th round pick, Scarlett a 5th round pick, and now Dameon Pierce another 4th round pick. Native of Bainbridge, Georgia, he totaled 1,806 yards rushing, 422 receiving yards, 23 rushing, and 5 receiving touchdowns in his 50-game career as a Gator. He had a team-leading 16 touchdowns last season to tie 6th all-time in a single season. I mean, Dameon Pierce had 16 touchdowns. Should have had more, given more carries. He doesn't have a lot of mileage on him. I mean, I'm sure Houston fell in love with that. I'm sure a lot of NFL teams fell in love with that. Not a lot of mileage on Dameon Pierce. For our sake, we wish he would have a little bit more. Florida probably offense would have looked a little better, more potent last season, giving Dameon Pierce the ball. But for whatever reason, did not get the carries. That's hopefully should only help him in his NFL career. Pierce averaged 5.5 yards per attempt, as his 23 rushing touchdowns are tied for 10th all-time in program history. He concluded his senior year with 5 multi-scoring performances and a score in 9 of 13 games. Dameon Pierce definitely going to be missed, not only on the field. We wish we got to see more, of course, off the field as well. One of the best interviews ever at the University of Florida. That's there for Dameon Pierce. Always forthcoming, always playful, always very interactive with the interviews there. So Dameon Pierce will be missed. Hope he goes on to do great things. And if you're a Jaguars fan in the NFL, you'll get to see him twice a year now. Dameon Pierce on the other sideline when they play Houston, but a team that needs a lot of help, as much as one of the NFL's worst teams. Hopefully, for Dameon Pierce's sake, he raises that running back room. I would not doubt for a bit if he ends up being a starter pretty early there for Houston. So there you go. That is it for the Gators NFL draft. this season. Kaiir Elam, Zachary Carter, Dameon Pierce, pretty much really the only guys we thought would be drafted for Florida do end up. It does end up just being just those three guys. So now, of course, some of the other guys we thought maybe have potential of being drafted, but we didn't really see it too much, did get picked up as undrafted free agents. Speaking of Dameon Pierce, let's go to the other running back. Malik Davis goes to Dallas. Jeremiah Moon gets picked up by Baltimore. Kind of a weird occurrence here, but Antonio Valentino and Tyrone Truesdale get to play together again for the New York Giants, both guys signing their deals, undrafted free agent deals with the New York Giants. And then Gene Delance signs a undrafted free agent contract as well with the Chicago Bears. So there you go. There's the names there for guys who did not get drafted, but hopefully go on to go through tryouts, try and make these teams in camps, at least, be a contributor in somewhat, like Donovan Steiner last year, drafted or not drafted, picked up as an undrafted free agent by the Pittsburgh Steelers and signed on to the practice squad. He was on the practice squad all year. So nice chunk of change being a practice player in the NFL as well. Still getting to play football for a living, just not at the highest level, but you never know. You never know what these guys can do. I'm sure they would love to be around the game of football. All right, here we go. Let's take a look at some news, or not news, but some notes from the University of Florida. Florida is one of three notes from the NFL draft, of course. Florida is one of three schools having a player picked in every draft in the Common Era, which began in 1967. Only three schools: Florida, Michigan, USC. There are only three schools that have had a player drafted since 1967. Florida is one of only two schools in the nation to have had at least one first-round selection in 9 of the last 10 NFL drafts. Florida has had 54 first-round picks since 1967, which ranks fifth in the nation and second in the SEC. Ohio State leads the way with 74 first-round picks since 1967. USC second with 73, Alabama with 66, Miami with 62, and Florida with 54. 6 Gators defensive backs have been drafted in the first round since 2010, which ties for second most in the SEC. Alabama leads the way with 8. Florida tied with LSU with 6 apiece. Georgia with 3. South Carolina with 2. Zachary Carter's selection in the third round. Florida now has the third most picks in the top 3 rounds of the draft among SEC schools since 1967. So, third most picks in the top 3 rounds of the draft among SEC schools since 1967. Florida comes in third there behind Alabama with 134, LSU 122, Florida with 119. That's ahead of Tennessee with 102, Texas A&M with 93. If you listen to the podcast version, the YouTube version has graphics explaining all this as well. Florida ranks third in the nation and second in the SEC for most defensive linemen drafted since 1967, only behind Miami with 57, Alabama with 52, Florida with 51. Florida is tied for the lead with Alabama, 25 picks, among defensive linemen from SEC schools in the first 3 rounds from 1967. And here we go. Here's the zinger. Now, it wasn't a great draft for Florida overall, of course, especially when you go look with Georgia and their 15 picks. I mean, ridiculous here. But Florida leads the state of Florida with the most selections in the last 10 drafts. And it's not even close. Florida with 63 selections in the last 10 drafts. Florida State with only 49. Miami with only 43. So, look, we know recruiting is not at the level it has been. Development hasn't been terrible. Florida's still sending guys to the league. And I think I saw it, I'm trying to remember, but in most draft picks maybe it was in the college football playoff era or the last 10 seasons, something like that. Florida and Miami were the only schools not to reach the college football playoff. So, I mean, kind of crazy there. But you had your Alabamas, your Ohio States, Notre Dame, Michigan, Oklahoma was the very last school in that regard. So in the state, we've known Florida has been better. In the last decade, better than Florida State, Miami. Hasn't amounted to much. That used to mean a whole lot. That used to mean everything. If you would have went to the 90s and the early 2000s, and Florida leads the state with the most selections in the last 10 drafts, that meant something. Doesn't mean as much anymore. But we still get that note of a brag over Florida State and Miami. We're beating them on the field. But Florida has the most selections the last 10 drafts in the state of Florida. Florida 63, Florida State 49, Miami 43. So there you go. There's some draft notes from the University of Florida in this past year's NFL draft. But now, before we sign off here, let's take a look ahead at this Gators roster now. And look, I'll throw it up. About 13 players for Florida that could have their name called next year. Now, I know I put this out on Twitter, and look, I know I said could. I specifically put could be drafted. Some guys will some guys will still come back to Florida. Some guys won't get drafted at all. Some of these guys will. Now, the big headliner. Now, if you watched the NFL Draft Friday night on ESPN, Mel Kiper, they gave him some names based on potential, or names to look out for next year's NFL draft. And he named Anthony Richardson third. Now, my original tweet was kind of misconstrued. I didn't mean to, it was my fault. I didn't mean to make it sound like he ranked Anthony Richardson third overall. He just listed Anthony Richardson third in a list of players that he said look out for next year's NFL draft. Now, a lot of that's right now based on potential, but Anthony Richardson is getting a whole lot of NFL draft love for next year. We heard it dating back to last year when he actually got to play. He had that performance versus LSU, and I remember listening to some podcast, and I forget what it was, but Anthony Richardson was getting some draft love then based off of size and potential and what you have out there. And then Mel Kiper comes Friday night and mentions Anthony Richardson as a candidate for next year's NFL draft. And I mean, of course, he's going to have to go out there and show it. A lot of it right now is mostly based on potential. He's got to go out there and put the stats up there with it. But he goes out there and has a good year. How good of a year does Anthony Richardson have to want to leave? I mean, does he have to be if you're a first-round pick, it's hard to turn down that money. So, does he have a type of season where he's a first-round pick? What does that mean for Florida? I mean, that's the biggest question. If Anthony Richardson is in next year's NFL draft, that means he had a pretty good season. How good could also affect how good Florida is this coming up season. If Anthony Richardson is, what you got, Bryce Young out there just in the conference, who's going to be in the draft as well. So, just in your own conference, is he behind Bryce Young next year? I think you put those guys beside each other, and Bryce Young has so far outperformed Anthony Richardson. But they go out there and have similar type of seasons, which I don't see it. Bryce Young and the weapons around him, the team around him, he's going to look great. Anthony Richardson can look great as well. He'll have to elevate the team around him. Bryce Young gets the benefit. Don't get me wrong, this is not a knock on him. I think he's good either way. He gets the benefit of not having to elevate so much to people around him as much as Anthony Richardson will have to do. How will teams value that? But I think you start looking at quarterback, and if he's up there with Bryce Young, could you blame him for leaving? And what would that mean for Florida? Hopefully, it would mean a great, surprising season for Florida at the same time. But that did catch some eyes. That did catch some ears if you saw or heard Anthony Richardson's name come up for next year's NFL draft. Gervon Dexter, of course, money year for him coming up. You'll hear his name next year in the NFL draft, barring, hopefully, I'm not wishing this on anybody here, injury or something like that. This is money year for him. I would expect him to have his name called next year's NFL draft. O'Cyrus Torrence could have went to the NFL this past season instead of transferring from Louisiana to Florida. He'll hear his name called. Rashad Torrence, defensive back, safety for the Gators. Mock draft that came out not long ago had him as a first-round pick, a pretty high first-round pick there. So, of course, I think that's based a little bit on potential too. We'll have to see some better play from Rashad Torrance, as well as the next name on the list, Trey Dean. His name has probably been the most polarizing at the point when I put this list up. Now, as I said, this is a list of who could be drafted. Right now, Trey Dean would be projected as a late round pick. I think I saw a 6th round pick right now for Trey Dean. So, of course, he will have to elevate his play. Hopefully, Patrick Toney, this new defense, can elevate Trey Dean's level of play to where we hear his name called in a 2023 NFL draft. Brenton Cox Jr. did get an NFL draft grade, not where he wanted it, not as high as he wanted it. He would have been drafted this past NFL draft. So, as I said, there's a reason for Florida only having 3 guys drafted this draft. Brenton Cox could have came out, had his name called in the 5th, 6th round of the NFL draft, maybe 4th, somewhere around there. But that would give Florida another draft pick. So, these numbers you can shift and move to determine where guys are slotted and if they're going to come back or not. Brenton Cox was one of those guys. So he comes back to raise his draft stock. He's been training for it. This is a money year for him. Like he said in the Gator Collective interview I did with him, he thought last year was going to be his money year and going to the NFL draft. Hopefully, new defensive scheme. He's another player that can raise his draft stock. Running back is kind of weird here. Naquan Wright, Lorenzo Lingard. You think you can group both those guys right? Of course, more production so far, but the guys who've been away from the high school ranks for quite some time now. Probably thought they'd be in the NFL already, especially Lorenzo Lingard and his recruiting profile. Then DeMarcus Bowman, he'd have to have a flash year. We haven't seen enough of him yet. The same kind of goes for Lorenzo Lingard at the same time, but he's been at a high school longer, so you would think, given that timetable, that time frame, that if he has a good season, would want to put his name into the hat. And injury concerns as well. Would he want to? Any NFL draft grade from him, he might go ahead and jump at that opportunity, given the injury history, not wanting to take another risk there. That's probably also going to hurt him as well for the NFL draft. And Naquan Wright, if he fully healthy, wants to lead this Gator running back room, he'll get every opportunity to go out there and prove, put up stats, and maybe go into the NFL as well. But, how does Montrell Johnson factor into all that? Because if he's going to be the best running back on the roster, how much does that eat into Naquan Wright, Lorenzo Lingard type of performance? So that's why, may not hear those guys' names called. Justin Shorter, another interesting name there. Probably getting a late round grade right now, I would say. Probably would be drafted in that 6th, 7th round based on the size, based on the potential there. But also kind of somebody like Trevon Grimes, who, 5-star recruit, wide receiver, goes to the Big Ten, transfers to Florida, doesn't have the production necessarily to pinpoint and point to. Trevon Grimes, maybe a surprise he didn't get picked up late in last year's draft. Justin Shorter, one more chance to prove that he can be capable of having his name called in the NFL draft. Now, I mentioned O'Cyrus Torrence because Anthony Richardson, I put him first because, of course, quarterback headline. Gervon Dexter, O'Cyrus Torrence. I think I put those guys toward, they're front of mind, the guys. Guys that you know are going to go play in the NFL. But I think you start looking at position that could be hit the hardest. I mentioned O'Cyrus Torrence toward the beginning there. I didn't group him with the rest of the offensive linemen who very well, Richard Garage is going to have his name called next year. He just graduated from University of Florida this past week. Last season for him coming up, he's going to have his name called. He's going to be an NFL draft pick next year. Now, Kingsley Eguakun at center played nice, very well for Florida at center. He has another good year. He could very well leave. Ethan White, if he can stay healthy at that left guard position, get a lot more playing time, he could very well leave as well. I don't think so. I'd lean toward those two guys probably coming back. But if they have pretty good seasons in this Billy Napier offense that we saw it from him, I probably should have included that. His draft picks from Louisiana, one was an offensive lineman. Another offensive lineman developed going on to the NFL draft from his time at Louisiana, well, Eguakun and White have experience. If they get coached up by Sell and Stapleton this coming up year, you could very well hear their name called. And Ventrell Miller, lately, I looked up right before came on live here, he's getting anywhere from a second to fourth round grade. So Florida would definitely have more than 3 players selected in next year's NFL draft. Ventrell Miller is the player who, of course, also, much like Brenton Cox, who thought they'd hear their name called in this year's NFL draft. But Miller gets injured, not able to put it on tape, has to come back to raise his draft stock. But he's somebody, of course, who's going to have his name called with a somewhat good season. Probably not too high. You know, you're looking at a mid to late pick there. And there's 13 names right there that could have their name called next year. I'm not projecting all those guys to have their name called. Let's see how this season plays out. Offensive line has a chance to be hit pretty hard from the NFL draft if you have a really good season from that group with Torrance, Garage, Eguakun, and White. That'd be odd to see, wouldn't it? 4 Gator offensive linemen in one season going, having their names called. So there we go. There's a look at possible 2023 NFL draftees for the Gators to raise up the 3 from this past NFL draft. As I said, about 10 more for next year's NFL draft that could have their name called. So, all right, there we go. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown, giving you a look at the NFL draft from the past few days, looking ahead to next year's NFL draft as well. Everybody, thanks for joining in on this episode. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.